She learned very early how to stay quiet, not because she had nothing to say, but because silence felt safer than honesty. Every word she swallowed felt like protection. Every emotion she hid felt like survival. Behind closed doors, her world had slowly become smaller, her voice softer, her presence lighter, until one day she almost disappeared from her own life. At first, it did not look like fear. It looked like love. It looked like concern. It looked like someone who wanted to control because they cared. But over time, love turned into rules. Rules turned into isolation. And isolation turned into a cage. She did not see the bars at first because they were built from words, not walls. She learned how to read moods the way others read books. She learned when to speak, when to stay quiet, when to agree even when her heart screamed no. She learned to walk carefully, to breathe quietly, to exist in a way that would not trigger anger. Fear became her constant companion, sitting beside her even in moments that were supposed to feel normal. There were nights when she lay awake listening to silence, feeling her heart beat too loudly, wondering how she had arrived at a life that no longer felt like her own. She questioned herself constantly, wondering if she was too sensitive, if she was imagining things, if maybe this was what love looked like. And the doubt slowly eroded her confidence until she no longer trusted her own thoughts. She stopped recognizing the woman in the mirror. Her eyes looked tired, but not from work. They were tired from pretending, from holding herself together in a place that kept pulling her apart. She smiled in public, laughed at the right moments, played the role well, because explaining felt harder than enduring. Fear does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it convinces you that you deserve what is happening, that if you were better, quieter, easier, none of this would exist. And she believed it for a long time. She believed she was the problem. She believed staying was safer than leaving, because leaving meant the unknown, and the unknown felt terrifying. But something inside her never fully disappeared. A small, quiet voice that asked gentle questions. Is this really love? Is this who you are becoming? Is this the life you want to live forever? She tried to ignore it, but the voice grew stronger with every moment of disrespect, every loss of dignity, every time she apologized for simply existing. The breaking point did not arrive as a dramatic explosion. It came quietly, one ordinary moment, one look in the mirror, one realization that if she stayed, she would lose herself completely, and the thought of disappearing frightened her more than the fear of leaving. Leaving did not feel brave, it felt terrifying. Her hands shook as she packed only what she could carry. Her heart raced with every step she took away from the life she knew. Fear followed her out the door, but for the first time, fear was mixed with something else, relief. The world outside felt unfamiliar and overwhelming, but it also felt open. She felt exposed, fragile, uncertain, but she was free. Free to breathe, free to think, free to exist without asking permission. Freedom did not erase the pain, but it gave her space to heal. The first days were heavy, filled with exhaustion and confusion. She questioned everything, her decision, her strength, her future. But every morning she woke up safe, and that safety felt like a small miracle. She began to notice simple things, the quiet of a room, the absence of tension, the ability to sit without fear. Healing was not fast, and it was not gentle. Some days she felt strong. Other days she felt broken. Memories surfaced unexpectedly. Fear returned without warning. But she learned that healing is not about never hurting again. It is about learning how to hold yourself when the pain arrives. She began rebuilding herself piece by piece, learning who she was without control, without fear, without constant apology. She learned to trust her instincts again, to speak without shaking, to say no without guilt. Each small act of self-respect felt like reclaiming stolen ground. She started with nothing but determination, learning new skills, rebuilding her confidence, earning her independence. Slowly, steadily, she proved to herself that she was capable, not because someone allowed her to be, but because she always had been. Self-respect became her foundation. She no longer accepted treatment that diminished her. She learned that love does not require fear, that respect does not demand silence, that real strength is choosing yourself, even when it is hard. The woman she became was not untouched by pain, but she was defined by growth. She carried scars not as shame, but as proof of survival. She did not escape to run away. She escaped to come back to herself. This journey was not just about leaving an abusive relationship. It was about choosing dignity over fear, voice over silence, self-respect over survival. And in choosing herself, she built a life that finally felt like her own. She did not wake up healed the next day. Freedom did not magically erase the past. It simply gave her space to breathe. And in that space, memories began to surface. Moments she had buried so deeply that she almost forgot they existed. They arrived without warning, in quiet afternoons, in crowded places, in the middle of laughter, and sometimes in the silence before sleep. She learned that trauma does not ask permission. It arrives when it wants and leaves when it is ready. At first, she was angry at what was taken from her, angry at how long she stayed, angry at herself for believing words that broke her down. Little by little, she learned that anger was not weakness. It was part of waking up. It was her spirit realizing it had been wronged and demanding to be heard. There were days she felt strong, and days she felt like she was starting all over again. Healing moved in waves, not lines. Some days she stood tall. Other days she curled into herself, questioning everything. But even on the hardest days, she noticed something different. She was no longer afraid of her own thoughts. She could sit with them, breathe through them, and let them pass. She began to rebuild her life slowly, intentionally. She chose small routines that grounded her. Morning walks, quiet moments with tea, writing thoughts she had once been afraid to admit. She began therapy, not because she was broken, but because she deserved support. She learned language for what she had experienced, and in naming it, she took away its power. With time, her confidence returned, not loudly, but steadily. She started trusting her instincts again, trusting the feeling in her chest that told her when something was wrong and when something felt right. She promised herself she would never ignore that voice again, no matter how inconvenient it felt. She explored new interests, things she had once been discouraged from doing. She learned skills that brought her independence. She worked hard not to prove anything to anyone else, but to prove to herself that she could stand on her own 2 feet. Every step forward felt like reclaiming another piece of herself. Financial independence became more than money. It became security, choice, and dignity. She no longer felt trapped by circumstances. She no longer felt forced to tolerate disrespect for survival. She learned that independence is not about never needing anyone. It is about knowing you will be okay, even if you stand alone. Relationships changed too. She became more selective, more aware. She no longer confused intensity with love or control with care. She learned that real love feels calm, safe, and respectful. It does not ask you to disappear to be accepted. There were moments when fear tried to return, whispering reminders of the past, but she met it differently now. She acknowledged it, thanked it for trying to protect her, and gently chose courage instead. She understood that fear would always exist, but it no longer had the power to decide her future. She began to speak her truth, quietly at first, then with more confidence. She shared her story, not for sympathy, but for connection. She realized how many others carried similar pain in silence, and in speaking, she gave permission for others to speak too. Self-respect became her compass. Every decision passed through it. Does this honor me? Does this protect my peace? Does this align with who I am becoming? If the answer was no, she walked away, without explanation, without guilt, without regret. The woman she was becoming felt unfamiliar at times, but she welcomed her. This version was softer, yet stronger, cautious, yet hopeful. She laughed more freely, stood more firmly, and no longer apologized for taking up space. Success for her was no longer measured by external validation. It was measured by how safe she felt in her own body, how calm her mind felt at night, how proud she felt of the boundaries she protected. She understood that peace is the most powerful form of success. She looked back sometimes, not with pain, but with compassion, for the woman who survived what she could with the tools she had. She no longer judged her past self. She honored her for getting out alive, for choosing freedom when it felt impossible. This journey was not about erasing the past. It was about transforming it, turning pain into wisdom, fear into strength, and silence into voice. She did not escape to become someone else. She escaped to finally become herself. And as she moved forward into a life built on respect, honesty, and courage, she carried one truth with her always. Freedom begins the moment you choose yourself, and self-respect is the foundation of every life worth living. She continued forward, not because everything felt easy, but because going back was no longer an option. Every step she took carried the weight of her past and the promise of her future. She learned that courage is not the absence of fear, it is movement despite it. And each day she chose movement, even when her legs felt heavy. There were moments when old habits tried to pull her back, the instinct to stay quiet, to minimize herself, to keep peace at her own expense. But now she noticed those instincts before they took control. She paused, she breathed, and she reminded herself that her safety and dignity mattered more than comfort built on silence. She built a life that reflected her values, slowly, intentionally. She chose environments that felt calm, people who listened without judgment, spaces where her nervous system could finally rest. She learned how important safety is, not just physical, but emotional, the kind of safety that allows you to be fully present, fully yourself. Work became a place of empowerment rather than escape. She poured her energy into building stability, not from fear, but from pride. Every accomplishment, no matter how small, felt meaningful because it was hers, earned through effort, clarity, and self-trust. She was no longer surviving, she was creating. There were days when she caught herself smiling for no reason, moments when joy arrived quietly without warning, and she realized that happiness did not always need a reason. Sometimes it appears when your life finally aligns with who you are. She became patient with herself, patient with healing, patient with growth, patient with the fact that some wounds take longer to close. She stopped rushing the process, understanding that true healing is not about speed, but depth. Her voice grew stronger. She spoke clearly, expressed needs, set boundaries without apology. She learned that saying no does not make you difficult. It makes you honest, and honesty became one of her greatest forms of self-respect. She noticed how differently she carried herself now. Shoulders relaxed, gaze steady, presence grounded. She no longer felt the need to constantly explain herself or seek validation. She trusted her decisions because they were rooted in awareness, not fear. The past no longer defined her, but it informed her. It taught her what she would never accept again. It showed her the cost of silence and the power of choice. She carried those lessons forward not as burdens, but as guides. Sometimes she met people who reminded her of who she used to be, and instead of judgment, she offered compassion. She understood how hard it is to leave, how confusing love can be when mixed with control, how strong someone has to be to walk away from what hurts but feels familiar. She became a safe space for herself and for others, someone who listened without fixing, who understood without minimizing, who supported without controlling. Her presence alone offered reassurance because it was grounded in authenticity. Her definition of strength changed. It was no longer about endurance at any cost. It was about discernment, knowing when to stay and when to leave, knowing when to speak and when to protect your energy, knowing that walking away can be an act of power. As time passed, the fear that once ruled her life faded into the background. Not gone, but quiet, no longer the loudest voice in the room. She learned to live alongside it without letting it decide her actions. She created routines that nourished her body, mind, and soul. She rested without guilt, celebrated progress without comparison, and allowed herself to feel proud without shame. She had earned every ounce of peace she now carried. Looking forward, she did not seek perfection. She sought alignment, a life where her actions matched her values, where her relationships honored her boundaries, and where her inner world felt as safe as her outer one. This was the life she built after fear, a life rooted in choice, self-respect, and courage. She did not just leave an abusive relationship. She reclaimed her identity, her voice, and her right to live without shrinking. And in choosing herself again and again, she discovered the most powerful truth of all. Freedom is not just leaving what hurts, it is staying true to yourself, no matter what the world asks of you.